But the European Union is facing a host of problems and challenges from abroad, but also increasingly internally. To speak more about this, I'm delighted to be joined by Michel, President of the European Council. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for sitting down with us.
Thank you.
Now, since you've assumed office in 2019, you've had a pandemic, you've had an energy crisis, you've had war in Ukraine, a whole list of problems. How is Europe coping in your mind?
I think that with all those difficulties that we have been facing, we have built a stronger, a more resilient European Union. Look at the pandemic, for instance. We reacted very quickly. We decided to act with solidarity, and we succeeded to overcome this terrible crisis, this terrible challenge. The war against Ukraine. Look, we are extremely united. It was not so easy, but in a few days following this full-scale invasion, we made a historic decision when we decided to provide military equipment, including little military equipment, to Ukraine. And it makes this European project different. It means that you understand that we need to do much more for our security and, for instance, for our defense readiness.
Mm-hmm. Now, you have experience in mediating. You look for consensus. That is your role. Also, when you were Prime Minister, a very, very diverse coalition in your time in Belgium. You talk about unity, which you do see that. You do hear that from yourself, from the Council, from Ms. von der Leyen. You do hear it. But in terms of, let's look at practically a little bit, on defense, for instance, and no one will doubt that you yourself have been very vocal about this for some time. But if you look at European policy, if you look at everything from the European Peace Facility, which has increased, but not by that much, it takes a lot of time. You look at the Common Defense and Security Policy, you look at PEPCO, there's so many elements. It is a very slow process. So on defense, can Europe really, can the European Union really play that strong of a role?
2 points. I'm absolutely convinced that because of this war launched by Russia against Ukraine, there is today a new paradigm within the European Union. All of us, we understand much better than before that the economic development is fundamental, this is key, but it's not enough. We need also to act more to guarantee our security, the safety of our citizens. And this is very concrete. Let me share with you a few examples. The European Peace Facility, this is a new instrument. It didn't exist a few years ago. And in a few months, we have decided to increase the amounts. Very recently, we have decided to mobilize an additional 5 billion euros package for Ukraine. This is one example. Second example, the ammunition. We have decided to increase the capabilities, the manufacturing capabilities of our defense industry. And we have to do more. Let me give you another example. The European Investment Bank. This is a very powerful body. And we have decided, the 27 leaders unanimously, that this bank will have the mandate in the future to invest in the field of defense. This is also a new paradigm. This is showing that we understand what's at stake. We understand that we face threats, and these are common threats for all the 27 member states, and we understand that we are stronger when we are united.
True, and no one will doubt that we are strong when united, but it is that unity that I'm questioning and many others are questioning. You mentioned the European Bank there, and in terms of bonds especially, that was raised at the last European Council, which I was present for, and very much the Germans. I remember the Chancellor's speech at the end of his press conference in German. He said that that's not in the cards. The Germans are not interested in bonds. The Dutch also following suit. So I'm just wondering which elements of defense investment will be.
2 points. We have to be honest. This is true that unity, it requires a lot of political effort. It requires a certain form of tenacity. This is very, very clear. But what is fundamental is the idea that we know, all of us, and it's a unanimous point of view, that we need more money because we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and we need more money. Some are in favor of Eurobonds. Some others are a bit reluctant. But there are various tools that we can use. I'll give you another example. The capital market unions. There are trillions of savings across the EU that should be channeled towards the European economy, the strategic investments. On that question, in a few months, we made huge progress. And I'm very confident, for instance, that next week in the European Council, the 27 leaders will give strong orientations, will make strong decisions to speed up, finally to speed up this project, which is very important because it's a way to inject more money, including in the field of defense.
Mm-hmm. You brought up two words, tenacity and money. So on that, I want to just share a quote that you've said. This is about frozen assets. Now you said, this was in in May of 2022. Personally, I'm absolutely convinced that this is extremely important, not only to freeze assets, but also to make possible to confiscate it, to make it available for the rebuilding of the country in 2022. Also, Prime Minister Kallas said the same thing around that time. Now the last UCO, which was a month ago in 2024, we finally have an agreement that we'll start using the windfall profits. And if we look at that number, though, that's maybe 1 billion by the summer, ultimately 3 billion. But you've said this tenaciously, actually, very much so, as many others. But it doesn't seem that the reality, I mean, this is over 2 years almost. Why is it so slow?
Look, it is showing that it works. When there is tenacity, it works. Because since then, we have the support of 27 countries on the principle to take the revenues of the frozen asset, which is realistic and a major step. And I'm very confident that in the days to come, there will be a political decision, a formal political decision on that topic. But it is true that the European Commission, together with the High Representative, they needed time to be in a position to make a formal proposal. But a few days, or not more than a few weeks, following the formal proposal that was put on the table, the leaders, they decided to make a step in the right direction. But there is something very important. Look at what we have decided in January, the EU. We have decided to provide an extra package of 50 billion euros for Ukraine, macro-financial assistance. This was vital for Ukraine. Why? Because this was a condition probably for the IMF, also to make sure that the IMF would be on board, would be on the side of Ukraine. And I'm calling on the United States, I'm calling on the American Congress to mobilize money for Ukraine. And let me tell them, this is not a question of generosity or mendicity. This is a question of security for them. Do they think that this is a good signal they send to China if they send a signal of weakness to Russia? I think that this is their interest to be much more supportive and much more active to provide financial assistance and military equipment to Ukraine.
I mean, the idea and the concept of continuing to have and rely on the United States for Ukraine, for Europe is vital. You said you're making calls out to Congress, to American politicians. What if they don't answer? What if they, in November, change their minds? What happens then?
There's only one answer. We have to support Ukraine for as long as it takes, and this is what we are doing. This is what we are doing in the field of financial support, military equipment, and that's why we are working very, very hard together with Thierry Breton, for instance, and the European defense businesses to increase the production capacities. It means that we need the clarity. We need fixed contracts so that the businesses, they understand that we are here on the long haul. Point one, and point two, political support. There is this proposal expressed by Vladimir Zelensky with the Just Peace formula based on accountability, UN Charter, based on justice, and we support this approach, and we try to rally more and more countries across the world to support this approach. There will be a meeting in June in Switzerland, and we'll do everything to support Vladimir Zelensky and the Ukraine, so that this meeting is a major step in direction of a broader support of the international community for the legitimate aspirations of the Ukrainians.
Yeah. I think it was Ms. Zelensky who said, not as long as it takes, but as fast as it takes. And I think this is the problem with Europe, unfortunately. I want to
let me tell you, this is more the problem with the United States.
Indeed. But at the same time, a different system, a federal system, which some would argue is faster in terms of...
It should be easier for the United States, is what you mean. I agree.
Yeah, it is. But at the same time, well, that we have an election year coming up as well. We have elections as well coming up in Europe as well. That's my next question for you as well. Certain polls very much look like your own party, Renew, the EPP, the stalwarts of the European Parliament might not do well at all. A very different force coming into the European Parliament. How will Europe look like if, let's say, we have a bigger bloc of far-right parties? That's going to change policy.
Look, with the polls, Donald Trump would not have been president of the United States. With the polls, Brexit would not have taken place.
So you don't trust the polls?
No, I'm just observing this a fact that very often when you have an elections, a few months before you have polls, and this is very often that the polls are not reflecting what is the outcome at the end of the elections, and the only polls with an effect and impact, these are the elections, point one. And point two, there are a few weeks ahead of us, and it's very important for the candidates to campaign, and this is a democratic debate, and we should not fear the democratic debate. On my side, I'm confident. I know that the citizens across the EU, they feel, they know that the EU is protecting them, their security, the well-being. This is not a perfect political project, for sure. 27 member states, 27 national governments, each of them with a national opposition, etc., etc. This is much more complex than the federal state in the United States. You are absolutely right. But look at what we have done. Look at the results, and even when we were facing extraordinarily difficult crisis challenges. At the beginning, you mentioned the energy crisis. This is also a good example. It was an energy missile launched by Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin against the EU, and we reacted and we managed to address this question. Not everything is solved, and energy is certainly a sector where it will be fundamental in the future to make additional decisions for more energy sovereignty. For instance, it's a question of security and a question of competitiveness.
Mr. President, you mentioned as well in terms of looking at Ukraine, and I know that also is a very personal issue for you. I know that you also met, previously, before in years past, Mr. Putin, but also you called him. You're one of the first European leaders in Ukraine. You called him, I think, shortly after the massacres in Bucha. You spoke to Mr. Putin. I remember also as well that you were in the press corps room in the European building when those final decisions were made that accession talks with Ukraine would begin. You never really come out to talk to the press like that. That was significant. But on the subject of Ukraine and accession, there are some in Europe that are worried. We look at the last few months, how the farmers feel about that. Can Ukraine rise to that challenge? Can Europe welcome Ukraine in the long term?
I'm on the side of Ukraine, I'm on the side of the EU, and it goes together, I think. And enlargement is a fundamental geopolitical choice. This is based, and it will be based on merits and on reforms that will be implemented. But I feel the very strong political will. I can see the political courage in Ukraine. I can see that the society in Ukraine, they understand that those reforms are fundamental to get closer to the EU and to become one day an EU member state, and our duty is to assist them, to help them. This is what we are doing. But you are absolutely right that in terms of enlargement, we have the Western Balkans, candidate countries.
Which is a very volatile region still. I mean, if we're looking at Republika Srpska and Bosnia-Herzegovina.
Yeah, it is a challenge, but what is my point? What I mean is the following. I think that we have our homework on both sides. The candidate countries, they know what they have to do. The European acquis, the reform, the rule of law, the fight against corruption, they exactly know what is needed to become an EU member state. But on our side, the 27 member states, we have also our homework, and we should be courageous on our side. It means that there are three topics that we have to address. First, what will be the priorities, the policies, when we'll be more than 27 in the future, point one. How do we pay for that, the financial solidarity? This is a question of responsibility and a question of credibility. And point three, how do we decide? How do we make sure that we are united, but at the same time we are ready to act and react when this is needed? And this is the debate that you have started at the highest level. The 27 leaders more than 1 year ago, and sometimes through informal meetings in small groups, it's changing, and we are converging more and more. In a few weeks, in a few months, by the end of June, we'll decide on a strategic agenda, and it will give fundamental orientations for the future of this EU project. It will give some answers to those questions, and this is partially in link with the political choice that we have made in direction of the enlargement.
But at the same time, that conversation changes and that solidarity changes quite a lot when Mr. Orban is in the room, also Mr. Fico increasingly. I mean, how worried are you that after the presidency changes, rather the council changes to Hungary in the summer, that we'll have a very different direction by then?
First, the rotating presidency has an an important role to play. But you know that we have our institutions, we have the European Council with 27 member states, and each rotating presidency has to take into account the role of honest broker to make sure that we are united and that we make decisions, point one. And I know that there are comments, and this is normal, about Viktor Orban, Hungary, sometimes about Slovakia, etc., etc. But look at the facts, look at the realities. And what are the realities? Systematically in the European Council on sanctions, very hard sanctions we've decided against Russia and the Russian regime, in terms of financial support, in terms of enlargement. Systematically we made decisions by unanimity in the European Council. And this is the most important for me.
One final point about China. Policy paper, the perception is partner, competitor, systematic rival. It can't be all three of those. Which is it to you in terms of China?
No,
and EU?
look, this is indeed a traditional position that was decided under Jean-Claude Juncker. But I have a very clear opinion about how we should engage with China. On the one hand, we are very clear in terms of democratic principles, rule of law, human rights, point one. And we don't fear to say what we think about it, point one. Point two, we need to rebalance the economic relationships with China. We have seen with Russia, if you are too dependent, there's a problem. One day there can be a problem. And that's why we need to diversify our supply chains. This is what we are doing with Latin America, with Africa, the critical raw materials. This is something which is fundamental for our future in terms of competitiveness and economic development. And point three, we need to engage with China on the global topics. Climate change. This is not realistic to make progress if we do not have China on board. And for that, we need to talk, we need to engage.
Looks very, very difficult if we have Mr. Scholz with a plane full of top-level executives, the entire German business lobby on its way to China. It sends a very different signal. It doesn't sound like and look like diversification to me.
If you allow me, I would like to disagree with what you said. Why? Because, for instance, Germany, with the other member states, they are strong and very, very determined European partners to diversify our supply chain, because this is the interest of the EU, including the interest of Germany. When Mr. Scholz is very active in Africa, and when he's paying visits to African leaders, this is also to help all of us to diversify our supply chain. The same in Latin America. I think that this is very important for the EU, because we want to be a global power, a global actor. It's very important to engage with the rest of the world and to find a balance between the promotion of our values, the fundamental principles and values. This is fundamental for sure, and the defense of our interests. And we know that for this twin transition, what we call the twin transition is the digital revolution on the one hand and the climate change on the other hand. We know that we need to adapt our economic model. We need more access to the raw critical materials, and for that we need to engage with the rest of the world.
Indeed. So many challenges still ahead for your presidency, for the European Union. Thank you so much, Mr. President, for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. That's Sasha Fahrbach for TVP World.